Kageno is a bottom-tier loser who dreams of being a raid boss but gets run over by a truck and is reincarnated as an OP Dark Lord. With his new life, he pretends to be a weak, pitiful student.
Look, that's him. No way, he's way too average.
While he secretly builds a harem of baddies that help him take out the cult that threatens the world. It all starts with a girl named Akane getting out of bed, entering the shower for the must-have fan service, and heading to school with her private driver. After getting glazed by all of her simps, she runs into Kageno, who immediately puts her in a foul mood. Despite thinking that he's built like a low-res NPC, she says hi to him only to learn that he doesn't even remember her name. Kageno knows he's the main character of the anime, and useless background characters don't concern him. Despite wishing Kageno's parents just slept that night, she puts on a smile and tells him she's Akane, but he doesn't show any interest and walks off. Later in class, Akane gets pissed off, thinking how everyone is simping for her, but Kageno never shows any interest in her. She recalls when Akane was young, she had to take a break from showbiz because of a scandal, and ever since that day, she has been secretly seeking validation so no one hates her. After playing teacher's pet for the day, she calls her driver, but he doesn't pick up because he's cornered by some thugs. Eventually, she decides to just walk home, but Kageno notices her leaving and keeps an eye on her. As she walks into a dark street, some men try to kidnap her, and while being suffocated, she notices Kageno watching from a corner. Later, she wakes up and finds herself tied up in a dark room alongside two of her abductors. The blonde tells her she should not have walked home alone because she is the daughter of Nishino Zaibatsu's CEO, and they won't let her go until her father sends them loads of money. Unbeknownst to them, Kanego is outside the warehouse and gets into gear so he can play the hero. In the meantime, one of the kidnappers gets bored and tells Akane to activate that Gok 9000 on his sausage. Amid their conversation, Kanego breaks the ceiling glass and jumps down in his low-budget Daredevil costume. Within seconds, he incapacitates the first kidnapper and stomps on his face. His technique impresses the other guy so much that he decides to fight him in full Brit mode. Because of his military background, he proves to be quite the challenge for the little guy, so Kanego goes all out against him with a crowbar. Kanego reveals he used to beat up bike gangs with the same crowbar, which earned him the infamous title of Balaclava Berserker. The military man pisses his pants and goes for his gun as if he's facing John Wick.
And the solution I found to that problem? It's more effective!
He then frees Akane from the ropes and disappears from her sight, but Kanego is still not impressed because he will never become the eminence in shadow he struggles against ex-military. Later, Akane calls the police to sort things out, and her daddy makes sure this incident is kept hidden from the public. The next day, she goes to school with the same old smile and runs into Kanego, who gets her name right for the first time. She is shocked to see that he's finally looking at her face, unlike before when he would just look in her general direction. She wonders if Kanego is also hiding behind a mask like her, but she will never find out because a truck runs the guy over the next day, causing his early demise. Before dying, he recalls how he was a nobody in his real life, much like you guys, but became a vigilant when he put on the mask. Despite being very strong for an average guy, Kanego realizes that he's a filthy casual who can't dodge bullets if he's surrounded by armed men. Even if he were to survive that encounter, there is no way he could parry a nuke unless he's this guy. Luckily, Kageno was given a second chance at life in a new world where he not only has the power of magic, but also a harem of powerful baddies who'd get moist if he ever so looked at them, and he would use them to become the eminence in shadow.
I don't remember how it started. Like how everybody dreams of being a hero when they're a kid. That's what I wanted to be. My passion kept burning, deep inside my heart. I did everything I could to master every skill I needed to be stronger. I gave everything to my training. I kept working, but the time came for me to face reality. None of this is going to mean anything, but I'll never get the kind of overwhelming power you hear about in all the stories. If, for example, I was surrounded by fully armed soldiers, that would be it for me. What if a nuclear missile fell from the sky? That's what it is to be human.
After getting run over, Kanego was born into the family of an aristocrat, baron, and retained all his memories from his previous life. Immediately, he noticed that both his parents were flowing with magical aura, so he took this new life as a blessing because magic would surely help him achieve his goal. The Baron's family had been pumping out powerful soldiers called Dark Knights, warriors that enhanced their physical abilities with magic. Despite being blessed with this power, Kanego, now known as Sid, was always outshined by his elder sister Claire. During the day, Sid was a side character with no voice lines, but he would play Fruit Ninja on criminals at night. In one of his routine brawls, he shows off his slime-like body, which allows him to make weapons and take blows better than your mother after 5 shots of vodka. After taking out all the bandits, he looks through their supplies for some valuables and comes across a weird blob-like monster inside a cage. Feeling its magical power, he realizes this blob is actually a creature that has been possessed with magic to look like a One Piece enthusiast, so he takes it back home and undoes the magic. Much to his surprise, the blob reverts back to a blonde girl.
What? But this can't be happening.
So he decides to give her his entire lore. Eventually, he gets carried away and makes a fake story about 3 heroes who slayed the demon Diablos and saved the world. However, the demon's dying breath cast a curse, which turned all 3 heroes into whatever that thing was. He tells her that the followers of Diablos are going to use her to revive their master, and his mission is to make sure they never succeed. After that, he shows her a flash of his powers and introduces himself as Shadow, a Batman wannabe who works in the dark against all that is evil in this world. The girl reveals she lost her purpose when she was turned into that beast, but since he is the one who saved her, she pledges to serve him until her final breath. She starts taking him more seriously than his own family and urges him to locate the other heroes. Staying true to his story, Sid calls their organization Shadow Garden and decides to name the girl Alpha. 3 years pass, and Sid still pretends to lose to his sister so she can take responsibility for becoming the heir. Just then, a maid tells Claire that some guests have arrived for her farewell party, so she tells Sid to stop the training. When nobles turn 15, they are sent to the Midgar Academy, where they learn to become Dark Knights. Claire is enrolled in that academy as well, but suddenly disappears on the day of her departure. Baron believes Claire must have been attacked by a master, but his wife gives him hell and tells him to find their daughter. Meanwhile, Sid skedaddles out of there with one of the maids, who is actually a girl named Beta, a possessed one that Alpha had recruited among many others. Alpha is out with the other recruits, finding clues about Claire's kidnappers, and believes it's all connected to the cult of Diablos. Beta shows him a map of all the possible locations where Claire could be kept, and Sid points to a random location, so they decide to look for her there. Meanwhile, Claire is locked up with magic sealing cuffs, and Viscount Grease says he wouldn't resort to such tactics unless it was necessary. He recalls the time when Claire showed signs of possession and was healed by her brother Sid, and Grease wants more information on the guy. Suspecting Sid is in danger, Claire breaks free of the chains and starts acting like it's that time of the month until Grease gives her the housewife treatment. Just then, their hideout is attacked by Sid's squad of baddies called the Sudden Shadows, who game end every single guard in the area. Grease asks them who they are, and Alpha introduces his group as Shadow Garden, whose sole purpose is to destroy the cult of Diablos. Hearing about the cult, Grease rushes in to fight them, but quickly realizes he is no match for the girls, so he resorts to a Senzabine from Walmart. However, the guy immediately skedaddles, and the girls stay behind because they think Sid will humble him. By sheer luck, Grease runs into Sid, who got separated from the girls at some point.
Well,
The two begin fighting.
You may have more magic power than Alpha. And 2, with the proper distance, you don't need speed and strength. But I don't care. As deep as I can go.
I'll teach you something. We're all worthless and fragile. That is reality. Of course. Maybe this boy is so much deeper than even you can imagine.
As he takes his dying breath, an amulet falls from his body, which holds the picture of his daughter Emilia. Sid takes the locket and returns home, and his sister shows up herself all roughed up. Her injuries heal overnight, and she leaves for the academy as if nothing happened. Later that day, Sid decides to clap all of her baddies until he can join his sister in the academy. but Alpha suddenly tells him that it is time for them to part ways. 2 years later, Sid takes a train to the academy and reflects on how all the girls left him in search of the cult of Diablos. He knows he picked up that story from the fake Reddit thread and believes the girls have caught on to his lies, which is why they have dumped him. He does not blame them for choosing their own paths because he recalls he did the same thing in his previous life. Sid arrives in the capital to enroll in the same academy as his sister Claire. But since he's a background character in the world's eyes, he has to live in a cheap hotel near the campus. Months later, he meets his only 2 friends, one of which is a blonde named Skell, and the other is a badly drawn Connie from Attack on Titan, also known as Poe. The 3 of them take the train to the main campus every day, along with hundreds of low-life losers. Sid says they can get dorms if they become honor students, but his friends think he's just as weak as them and tell him to keep dreaming. The guys then remind him that he scored worse than them in the previous test, and as his punishment, he has to ask out the coldest girl in their academy. The girl in question is Princess Alexia, who drops boys left and right because she's destined for an arranged marriage due to her political background. After school, Sid puts on his side character face and asks Alexia out, hoping he will get rejected and become even more irrelevant than he already is. However, Alexia actually accepts his proposal and promotes him to the role of a rom-com protagonist. During lunch, he gets a lot of unwanted attention from Alexia's Twitch subs, and even his friends don't understand why she would give Sid a chance. Just then, Alexia joins their table and is served some upper-class food. But when Sid casually starts eating her food, she gives him a bombastic side-eye because he is acting way differently than before. He's acting so confident so she can dump him on the spot. However, she seems to be enjoying every second of it and even invites him to a PT class. Despite not wanting to go, Sid is dragged into the elite section thanks to Alexia's contacts, where the instructor named Xenon introduces him to the class. Xenon introduces him to the royal Bushin style of combat and pairs him with Alexia for fencing. Sid notices that Alexia is holding back her magic solely to focus on her parry and counterattack skills, which shows how much control she has over her body. In the world's eyes, Alexia is an NPC compared to her sister Iris, who is considered the strongest dark knight in the kingdom, but Sid can see the potential she has. After the class, Xenon and Alexia start fighting for some reason, and Sid takes this opportunity to skedaddle. Later, he learns Alexia is engaged to Xenon and has used him to get out of their engagement, but he cannot break up with her because she knows he proposed to her because he lost a bet with his friends. All she needs is enough time with Sid, so Xenon loses interest and breaks the engagement. When Sid doesn't play along, she resorts to a cash bribe that has him submitting in no time. For the next few days, Sid continues to be Alexia's rented boyfriend while Xenon decides to wait and see where it goes, which frustrates Alexia. One day, the 2 of them go out to eat ice cream, and Sid asks why she doesn't want to marry Xenon. She says Xenon is the perfect guy with 0 flaws on the surface, but no one is this clean, which means he must be hiding his true self to get some shotties on his ding-dong. 2 weeks later, Sid finds Alexia in a grumpy mood, and she explains that she wanted to be as good as her sister but didn't have the skills to. This earned her the title of fencing ordinaire, but she believes Sid's fencing is just as ordinary as her. Sid takes it as a compliment because he likes her fencing style, and Alexia recalls her sister telling her the same thing after she suffered a defeat at the Bushin Festival. Hearing those words again reminds her of the humiliation she faced that day, so she leaves the train in a foul mood. The next day, Sid casually walks to school with his NPC friends, relieved that his fake relationship will be over. However, he learns that Alexia did not return to her dorm last night, and he is the lead suspect in her potential kidnapping. Meanwhile, Alexia finds herself tied up with magic ceiling chains and looks around to see a disfigured creature nearby. Just then, a mad doctor walks into her cell with some surgical equipment and keeps babbling about getting his hands on royal blood. When she asks what he plans to do with her blood, the guy says he is going to revive the demon. At the same time, Sid is getting beaten to a pulp because all the guards think he is the one who pumped and dumped her. Despite feeling no pain at all, Sid pretends to be scared and hurt because that's what background characters who die in the first episode do. Back in the cell, the doctor keeps taking Alexia's blood but then starts losing his mind when he remembers his lab was destroyed along with all of his research. He is at risk of getting excommunicated without his research and starts stomping on the disfigured creature in the next cell. He then picks up a bowl of his goon material and force feeds it to Alexia so she can replenish her blood. The next day, Xenon meets Iris to discuss Alexia's kidnapping, and they conclude that even though Sid was the last person to meet her, there is no way he could overpower her. Iris decides to let him go, but advises Xenon to keep an eye on him just in case. Just then, they notice a commotion outside, and it's Claire trying to force her way into the holding cell to save Sid. Meanwhile, Alexia's arm is covered with injection marks, and her body with the doctor's jizz. That evening, Sid is finally released from the holding cell and decides not to heal his wounds instantly because he is being watched at all times. However, he comes across Alpha on the way, who takes out the stalkers and meets him back at his apartment. She says they'd made a lot of progress finding the cult, and Sid just smiles, knowing it's just a load of nonsense he made up years ago. She further explains that Alexia was kidnapped by a member of the cult who wants her royal blood to revive the demon, but he once again pays no attention because he made up the whole story. Alpha then tells him to take care of himself and tells him that Delta is here before leaving. Sid knows Delta takes this thing way too seriously, so he decorates his room with all the things he's taken from bandits and gets into his shadow costume, so she falls under the impression that he is also taking their mission seriously. Later, Delta arrives and says they have gathered 114 people who will launch a simultaneous attack on all the cult's hideouts scattered throughout the city and rescue Alexia at the same time. Later, as Sid exits his apartment, 2 guards try to frame him for the kidnapping again, but he sends them to the afterlife, all while Delta writes about his heroics in her journal. Meanwhile, the Shadow Garden launches an attack on the city, and Eris takes charge of restoring order. In the cell, the doctor starts packing because he fears getting caught, but then injects his creation with a serum in hopes that it will save her, and makes sure to game end the doctor first before freeing Alexia from her chains. After that, it breaks out of the ceiling and goes berserk in the city, allowing Alexia to escape her cell. However, she runs into Xenon on the way, who explains that he is in charge of the whole facility. Alexia is relieved because she already predicted Xenon was hiding behind a mask, but the guy says it does not matter because he already has her blood. Alexia understands her ill intentions and tries to fight him, but he easily overpowers her and tells her she will never be as good as her sister. As she lies there defeated, she hears someone approaching the scene and looks up, only to see some main character aura. The man in question is none other than Sid, a shadow in his disguise. Xenon does not hear the boss's music in the background and thinks he's up against Soldier of Godric, so he starts yapping about how he is an untouchable core member of the cult. However, Shadow teleports behind him and Flex's So Hard Dude starts questioning his entire existence. Meanwhile, the city is turning into an Attack on Titan episode with a giant monster lurking around. Eventually, Iris comes into the play thinking she's Mikasa Ackerman, but the monster regenerates from her attacks. After all her efforts prove in vain, Alpha shows up to school her on how to handle monsters. With one attack, she removes the possession on the monster and notices her holding the same locket Grease had, which means she is his daughter Milia. Back underground, Sid and Xenon engage in a sword fight, and the latter decides to unleash his full power. Even then, he is no match for Shadow and bites the dust easily, much to Alexia's shock. As a last resort, Xenon swallows some cheap senza beans and unlocks his new form, only to get destroyed within seconds. Seeing him in action, Alexia realizes that Shadow's fencing style is ordinary like her own, but he has perfected it in such a way that he overpowers everyone in his path, which is why he wants to be like him. Sid demonstrates the full extent of his powers, explaining that he once wished to withstand a nuclear bomb, but then he realized why be a king when you can be a god, so he became nuclear himself. Sid then releases a full-blown nuclear explosion on the city, which creates a giant crater, leaving Alexia to rethink his entire life choices. Just then, Eris finds her unscratched in the crater, and the 2 sisters finally reunite. After the matter is solved, Alexia meets up with Sid and thanks him for complimenting her fencing style because she understands what she can achieve with it after seeing Shadow in action. She then mentions how Xenon got evaporated in the attack, which means she's single and ready to mingle, but Sid hits her with a
I'm gonna go with a no.
She gets so upset at the rejection that she straight up murders him in cold blood. Later, the Shadow Garden discusses the aftermath of their operation, but a more pressing issue has arisen. Turns out, some low-life club is pretending to be the Shadow Garden, so the ladies must catch them before they do something stupid in their name. Meanwhile, Iris briefs Marco and Glenn about the whole fuss about the cult of Diablos and the Shadow Garden. She also informs them that Xenon is a member of the cult, which means there are many more moles in their own ranks. She tells them to launch an investigation and shows them a magical artifact that is their only lead. At the same time, a girl named Sherry is carrying dozens of books on the same magical object but bumps into Sid, who is still feeling the after effects of rejecting Alexia. When the guy offers her a hand, she starts seeing unicorns and rainbows. Later that night, a mysterious figure claiming to be Shadow Garden murders a random citizen in cold blood. The next day, Skell and Poe ask Sid if he clapped Alexia, and the guy casually says they broke up without doing any of that stuff. To help him get some shotties on their knees, Skell suggests they hit up a place called Mitsugoshi, a store that sells all kinds of stuff that can help their cause. Meanwhile, Sherry meets with Iris and learns about the artifact that they found within the facility, which was destroyed in the earlier attack. With Sherry being the Lara Croft of this world, they want her to decipher the artifact. Sherry argues that she is still just a student, but her father, Lutheran, the assistant principal, urges her to take this opportunity. Once Sherry agrees, Iris appoints both Crimson Knights Glenn and Marco as her guards while she conducts her research. Alexia also wants to help find the cult of Diablos, so Iris gives her permission but tells her to stay out of trouble. That evening, the boys head to Mitsugoshi, but the place is crowded, and Poe worries they won't make it back before the curfew. He mentions hearing about a psychopath murdering people in the night, but Skell goes in stating they are just rumors. A girl approaches Sid and asks if he would be so kind as to fill out a survey for her, causing him to join her. The woman then takes him to a secret mansion on the roof where a squad of baddies bow to Sid. Just then, he learns that one of his Shadow Garden girls, Gamma, is the one responsible for this arrangement. Turns out, Sid used to share recipes and stuff of his previous world with her, and she used all the wisdom to create a sort of mall where she now sells all that otherworldly stuff. She then invites Sid to sit on his throne, and the guy savors the moment and wonders if they'll be like this once he becomes the eminence in shadow. Gamma then reveals she has been making a load of profit from all the stores throughout the city and has collected a total of 1 billion zeni so far. While Sid is sweating bullets, Gamma mentions that a murderer has appeared in the capital who claims to be the Shadow Garden. Uninterested, Sid is about to skedaddle, but Gamma introduces him to Nu, the newest member of their group, who is going to serve as his personal assistant in the meantime. Sid says he will make contact if needed and sneakily steals one of the gold coins from the pile, which is pretty stupid, given how all that money belongs to him anyway. Rushing back, he recalls how Alexia flatlined him after he rejected her, which makes him believe she is the one behind the murders. Just then, he senses Alexia nearby and tells his friends that they should leave him behind because he has to take a dump. After they leave, Sid realizes Alexia is not the murderer but is, in fact, fighting a mysterious guy claiming to be the Shadow Garden. When more of his friends show up, Sid jumps in and rescues her from getting sliced. Telling Alexia to stay out of his business, Sid goes after the runaway criminals and takes them out one by one. When he is down to the last guy, Nu shows up and offers to handle the situation herself. Gaunt Knight, the mastermind behind this operation, learns about this incident but decides to ignore it because his eyes are set on retrieving the artifact. Later, Alexia informs Eris that the murders were committed by someone claiming to be Shadow Garden when, in reality, he belonged to a different faction. Despite this news, Eris claims both of them are her enemies because they are causing havoc in her city. The next day in school, Poe and Skell try their luck scoring chicks with chocolate but fail miserably. Uninterested, Sid leaves his box on the table next to him, where Sherry happens to be studying. She takes the chocolate home, and her father believes the boy who gave it meant it as a sign of love, which makes her nervous. She spends the whole night thinking about the whole thing and finally decides to taste the chocolate, which makes her moist. The next day, Sid is walking to school when Nu approaches him in the school uniform. She explains that the guy they captured last night was brainwashed, which destroyed his mind, making it impossible to extract any info from him. As she keeps yapping about the cult of Diablos, Sid just stares at the flyer of the Bushin contest, which he was enrolled in by his friends without his permission. They thought he could win the whole thing and get his lollipop licked, but Sid punched them in the gut to show his disapproval. Nu continues to explain that the cult abducts children and brainwashes them with promises, only to brainwash them into doing their bidding later. She also mentions something about a guy named Rex, who is a core member of the cult and their biggest enemy as of now. Despite being one of the children, Rex has maintained his sense of self, which makes him much more dangerous than the rest. After he leaves, Nu realizes she once had a normal life before she was possessed, but she would choose her current life over the previous one any day. When the festival begins, Poe and Skell place bets to earn some cash, but end up losing all their money. Meanwhile, Sid is paired with Student Council President Rose, who is among the top swordswomen in the academy and radiates main character aura. As the match begins, the two lunge toward each other, and Sid quickly places a packet of fake blood in his mouth so he can fool the world into thinking he's no match for her. He then showcases all the million ways to die in the West, so he could come off as a weak and pathetic loser. However, when he gets back up again, Rose apologizes for going easy on him and lunges from a strong attack, only for the referee to declare her the winner before she ends up game-ending Sid. Despite losing as planned, he manages to earn Rose's respect because she thinks he won the Battle of Spirits. As he exits the arena covered in band-aids, Sherry approaches him out of worry and asks if he's okay. She decides to hang around for a while and expresses how incredible it was for him to get back on his feet after getting beaten so badly. She hands him a bag of cookies she baked to thank him for the chocolates and offers to start their relationship as a friend, but Sid doesn't even remember who she is and has no idea about the misunderstanding. Nonetheless, he agrees to become her friend, and they two are later joined by Lutheran, whom Sid remembers as a once champion of the Bushin Festival. He was supposed to stay away from him to keep his identity hidden, but has already agreed to become Sherry's friend, which changes things. Later, Sherry is doing research but can't stop thinking about how to get back shots from Sid, so she decides to see the only girl who has had the misfortune of dating him. Alexia invites her over for tea, and Sherry nervously asks her if she is still dating Sid. Alexia says it was all just a ruse to fool people when, in reality, she had no interest in the guy. Sherry then informs her that she was planning on becoming Sid's girlfriend, which irritates Alexia, but she plays it off with a smile and tells her that she will help her get a score. The next day, Rose arrives in class to explain the student selection related to a vacancy in the student council and notices Sid among the backbenches. Meanwhile, Gaunt Knight goes underground and casts a spell that covers the school in an invisible barrier. Sid notices this and realizes all magic within the school has been sealed, and soon after, the whole academy is taken over by men claiming to be Shadow Garden. As the men force themselves into the classroom, Sid gets excited because his childhood aspirations of having his school attacked by terrorists have come true. As he sees Rose getting attacked by the men in black, he jumps in front of her to take the hit because he wants to be the character who dies first in a horror movie. As he does his best impression of dying, Rose starts crying, thinking she lost someone who truly loved her. After she is forced to join the rest of the students in the auditorium, Sid wakes up again, explaining that he used a secret technique that made him appear dead for 10 minutes. He also realizes he can still use his magic despite the barrier, but decides not to because that is something only the main character will do. Meanwhile, Sherry is busy in her research when she is attacked by Rex, who has come to retrieve the artifact. Just then, Glenn enters the room and blocks Rex's attack. Rex is impressed at how strong he is even without magic and decides to fight him fair and square. While Marco is busy dealing with another intruder, Sherry uses this chance to skedaddle. As the students are all held hostage, Iris is trying her best to take the situation under control, and the cult has placed snipers in the windows to make no one escape their sight. In the meantime, Sid is watching it all from a distance and enjoying every moment of it. However, he is frustrated with the lack of aesthetics and complains about the criminals wearing all black in the middle of the day. Out of frustration, he starts yeeting them into the afterlife and even helps Sherry escape the halls. As she makes her way to the top, Sid keeps removing all the obstacles in her way without her knowledge. However, when she trips off the stairs, Sid appears and saves her from falling. The guy then advises her to watch her surroundings before she moves around and to take off her noisy slippers. In her father's study, she finds a book mentioning the Eye of Avaris, which is the artifact being used to block magic. Since the guys in black can use magic just fine, she believes the artifact allows them to use magic at only a specific frequency. It keeps absorbing all other magic inside itself until it overloads and releases it all at once, which will cause a big boom. She thinks the artifact is hidden somewhere under the auditorium and believes this other artifact is the key to disabling the Eye of Avaris. However, she left all the tools in the study, so Sid decides to fetch them for her. Meanwhile, Gaunt Knight asks Rex why he hasn't brought the artifact, and he carelessly says a pink-haired girl ran away with it. The Knight sternly tells him to find that girl, and Rex tells him there is a master fighter somewhere in the school before leaving. Later, Rex is accompanied by some men who suddenly disappear before his very eyes, which leaves him shocked. As he turns around, Sid slaps his face and disappears again, prompting Rex to form a magical net around his body in hopes of catching him. However, Sid easily counters his technique and throws him into the classroom, filled to the brim with all the criminals he has executed. Meanwhile, Nu is in Sherry's room and pays her respects to Glenn, who lost his life fighting Rex. She then turns her attention to Marco and pulls out a shuriken, only to be surprised by the sudden appearance of Sid. He asks what she is planning to do, and Nu reveals she was engaged to Glenn before she was possessed. She also reveals the Shadow Garden is scattered around the school and awaiting orders, but only the 7 shadows can fight at their standard levels due to the magic sealing artifact. Gamma is the only one of those 7 present in the city, and this type of mission does not suit her expertise. She asks Sid to give them orders, but the guy is not interested in her yapping and asks her to help find Sherry's equipment. After everything is found, he explains that he will use this to disable the artifact, so Nu puts the Shadow Garden on hold until the task is completed. Meanwhile, the guards tell Iris that the situation seems pretty bad because they don't have many options without their magic, so they basically hit a stalemate. On the other hand, Sherry manages to decipher the artifact and opens a secret door that leads to the underground tunnels so she can disable the Eye of Avaris. As she steps in, she recalls how her mother was murdered when she was young, and Lutheran was the only one who offered her a home because her mother was a close friend of his. Because of his kindness, Sherry is really attached to the man and wants to repay him by continuing his legacy. Meanwhile, Rose is being pushed by the boys around her to do something about it, and things get only more unsettling when the abductors start using the students for target practice. In the meantime, Sherry goes through the tunnels and manages to reach the auditorium. After spotting the Eye of Avaris in Gaunt Knight's hand, she activates the other artifact and throws it towards the center, which drops the magic sealing barrier. Rose quickly notices this and leads a rebellion from within the school. Rose still hasn't forgotten how Sid gave his own life to protect her and is about to go berserk on these gentlemen. However, Sid makes a grand entrance as Shadow and steals all the spotlight. He then introduces the real Shadow Garden to the students, and the cult's men fall down one after the other. Amid the chaos, the whole building mysteriously catches fire, and the Gaunt Knight slips away unnoticed. After escaping the building, Rose meets up with Iris and tells her that the Shadow Garden rescued them, but the terrorists were using the same name. Meanwhile, Sherry is looking all over the place for her father but can't seem to find him anywhere. Inside, Gaunt Knight enters Lutheran's office and burns some of his research books. Just then, he notices Sid sitting by the window and learns he is already aware of his true identity. The guy finally takes off his mask and reveals himself to be Lutheran himself. Sid asks why he joined the dark side despite having a good rep, and the guy finally drops his entire lore. He explained how he was one of the best swordsmen in the whole nation until he got sick and lost all his glory. To seek a cure, he took the help of Sherry's mother, who welcomed him with open arms. Eventually, they realized the cure lay in the Eye of Avaris, but the woman wanted to hand it over to the government because she deemed it dangerous. Lutheran couldn't risk wasting his life, so he murdered her in cold blood and took the artifact. Sherry never realized it was he who yeeted her mother and took over her mother's research without a question. After giving a hero monologue, Sid challenges him to a fight and gets flatlined in a single attack. However, he returns as Shadow, and Lutheran admits that he is currently at a disadvantage, which is why he resorts to using the Eye of Avaris to enhance his strength. Even at full strength, he is no match for Shadow but refuses to admit defeat. As he continues fighting, Shadow takes full control of the battle and stabs the guy in the heart, which not only causes his demise but also breaks the artifact. As Shadow coldly walks away, Sherry enters the room and only sees the aftermath of their battle. Shadow considers telling her about all the evil things Lutheran had done, but then decides it's best if she doesn't know. After the dust settles, Alpha reads the newspaper in which Shadow has been blamed for the chaos and painted as a criminal. Meanwhile, Sid meets up with Sherry again, who doesn't recognize him as Shadow. She thanks him for the help and reveals she will be studying abroad in Lagos. She says she needs to do something important, but when Sid asks what, she says it's a secret and leaves the academy. Since the campus is badly damaged, the students get an early summer break, and most of them head home. Sid, on the other hand, stays at the dorms and even receives a letter from Alpha, who asks him to come to Lindworm. Meanwhile, Epsilon, one of the 7 shadows, appreciates her bussy build in front of a mirror and recalls the time when she was rescued by Sid. The guy told her she could change her fate by using the power of his slimy body, but she used it to give her bigger melons. Meanwhile, Beta is in her study writing a rom-com story, but fails to cook anything good. Eventually, she decides to touch some grass but runs into Epsilon, who boasts her milk packs in her face and claims Sid has been eyeing them lately. The two start arguing over whom Sid wants to clap the hardest until Nu arrives and tells him that they're summoned by Alpha. On the other hand, Iris comes to the Mitsugoshi to help Alexia's shop and is mesmerized by the whole aesthetic of the place. Turns out, Alexia is heading off to Lindworm as a special guest for the goddess's trial, but wants to use this opportunity to catch some criminals. Just then, Gamma personally welcomes them and offers them some otherworldly snacks. Alexia then asks her to show her some clothing, and Gamma pulls out a whole display of thongs. While Alexia is interested, Iris utterly rejects the idea because they are a little too spicy for her. In the end, Iris gets manipulated by Alexia into accepting the new fashion and buys a bunch of thongs for herself. Meanwhile, Rose reflects on the time when the school was on fire and she came across Sid, who appeared to be barely alive. She thinks he gave his life for her, so she accepts his love wholeheartedly and decides to give him sloppy toppies for the rest of his life. At present, Sid finds himself on a train to Lindworm, sharing a cabin with Rose, who has totally fallen for him. Sid wanted to take the train like a background character, but found Rose at the station, who tagged along and wouldn't take no for an answer. Sid is heading to the lands for the goddess's trials, and Rose believes he is a devotee of the goddess Beatrice, who is the inspiration behind these trials. While Rose wants to have Sid's babies, he believes she's trying to convert him to her religion and takes every chance to avoid her. Eventually he arrives in Lindworm, and Rose tells him a local legend about the hero Olivier, who severed Demon Diablo's arm and buried it somewhere in the surrounding mountains. As they continue, Rose spots a book fair by her favorite author, Natsume, and excitedly joins the line. In the meantime, Sid looks at some of her most popular books and realizes they are all plagiarized from famous comics and anime in his previous world. Sid believes someone else from his world must have been reincarnated as well and joins the line, only to learn that it is actually Beta. She was interested in literature, so Sid told her stories from his world, which she had turned into a business. Beta then hands him a signed book, much like every other person in line, and tells him that all the mission details lie in it. Meanwhile, Alpha visits the cathedral and finds the Archbishop's body hanging over Olivier's statue. She believes the cult of Diablos must have flatlined him for knowing too much and decides to uncover the truth tomorrow. In the meantime, Sid is watching the show from the top when he notices an assassin fleeing the scene. As he follows him into a narrow alley, the assassin attacks Sid but gets sliced up by Epsilon. She reveals the target was murdered by an executioner who went into hiding, but they are moving to Plan B to stop the cult. The next day, Sid gets himself a nice hotel and gets inside the hot spring, which is one of his favorite things to do. He enjoys the warm water with his eyes closed, but Alexia is also present and is panicking because she thinks he's going to open her chamber of secrets. She remembers their last encounter when she almost flatlined him for rejecting her. But it's all good because she's just a girl. Sid questions how the trials work, and she explains it's a fighting ritual that will be performed once the sanctuary gates open. Hundreds of fighters seek to fight the spirit of the heroes that reside in the sanctuary, but only a handful of people are given that honor. She also reveals she came here to hold an audit and question the Archbishop, but he is no longer in the picture. Changing subjects, Alexia purposely stretches her body in hopes that Sid will eye her, but finds it amusing how he doesn't care at all. To provoke him, she tries to make fun of his sausage by calling it mini, but Sid gets out of the hot spring and shows him that he's actually packing a Diddy and Drake down there. The guy then makes a dramatic exit from the hot spring, leaving Alexia wet in more ways than one. Before the trials, the new Archbishop explains that Goddess Beatrix gave her powers to hero Olivier so he could defeat Demon Diablos, who then severed the demon's left arm and sealed it in the sanctuary. Before coming here, he told Alexia that she could not hold an audit because the church is busy looking for the guy who murdered the previous Archbishop. Alexia believes something is sussy and wants to go back so she can return with proper authorization from her father. However, that will take days and all the evidence of corruption will be erased by then, so she is running out of options. As the trials begin, some NPCs discuss how winning them will grant heroes a medal, which they can use to enter any knightly order of their choice. One after the other, warriors from all over the world call out the spirits for a battle but get no response from them. After waiting for hours and hours, Sid gets bored and wishes he had enrolled in the trails so he could show off his skills as Shadow to the world. He also realizes he hasn't met Alpha ever since he got here. Just then, he hears the announcer calling his name and realizes he has to show up or he will be expelled from the academy. With no other options, Sid takes his shadow form and enters the arena, shocking the whole stadium. Just then, a spirit from the sanctuary answers his call, and Aurora, the Witch of Calamity, appears before him. The Archbishop also explains that Aurora is the most powerful witch in history who has caused chaos and destruction in the world, and Shadow is as good as dead. However, Alexia believes Aurora showed up only because she deemed him a worthy opponent, which means their battle will be legendary. As the two engage in combat, Aurora covers the whole arena with blood spears, but Shadow easily dodges them. He looks at the witch in admiration because he has finally met a strong opponent after a long time. However, this Aurora is merely a fraction of what the real witch was like, so Sid quickly finishes her off and disappears, wishing that he could fight her at full strength. Shadow then disappears from the arena, but the barrier is broken and a giant magical door appears in the middle. Alpha is watching this from a distance and comments that the Sanctuary has answered Shadow's call. Meanwhile, Sid watches from a distance, content that everyone will only be talking about Shadow and not him. Despite being intrigued by the door, he decides he's too cool for it and walks away, only for the door to follow everywhere he goes. Eventually, he gives up and enters the door. Back in the arena, the Archbishop is shocked to see that the cathedral responded to Shadow and goes on to explain different kinds of doors, including the forbidding door, the beckoning door, and the welcoming door. Since such a thing has never happened before, he tells the guards to empty the stadium and cancel the event. After only Rose and Alexia are left, the Shadow Garden makes a grand entrance, and Alpha tells the girls to behave until the doors close. Alexia is on her guard but doesn't dare unsheath her sword because she knows Alpha is even stronger than Eris. Leaving Epsilon to handle matters in their absence, the Shadow Garden approaches the door and enters it. Epsilon then pretends to apprehend Gamma and even the Archbishop, but the Baldy calls upon an assassin named Venom, who catches her off guard. Instead of slashing her neck, Venom ends up severing her Kardashians that she had accumulated with the power of slime. However, she quickly attaches them back and slices up Venom in a single attack. She then takes Gamma and the Archbishop to the door, but as it closes, Alexia and Rose enter as well. Appearing on the other side, they are confronted by the Shadow Garden, and Alpha says it'll be best if they see it with their own eyes. Inside, she shows them the statue of a woman but addresses it as the hero Olivia, which confuses Rose. She implies that the cult of Diablos altered history and turned the hero into a man, when in reality, Olivia was an elven woman, much like herself. The Archbishop starts to panic and says Alpha is a possessed elf who should not exist. Ignoring his cries, Alpha uses her elven magic to activate the vault in front of them, which causes the room to glow in a bright light. Alpha is now accompanied by the spirit of the hero, Olivia, and she invites everyone to step in and learn of the cult's secrets. Meanwhile, Sid enters a white void and meets the real Aurora, who praises his strength and asks how he got here. Sid explains he followed a door, or rather, the door followed him and led him here. Sid decides to go back the way he came, but Aurora tells him to read the room and see that she is apprehended. Sid frees the woman with his sword, who then creates a new dress with her magic and tells him that they both have the same goal, which is to get out of this place. When Sid agrees to team up, she says this place is a prison of memories forged by ancient battles, and destroying the central core will also destroy the prison. She also shows him that they cannot use their powers here, so they will have to rely on their physical prowess to get out of there. They go through the hero's memories and find a younger version of Aurora sitting all by herself. Approaching her, they see her crying, and Aurora slaps the sorrow out of her, which ends the memory. Meanwhile, Alpha guides everyone through Olivia's memories and shows them how the cult used this place as a lab to experiment on orphan children. Most of the girls could not survive the experiment and turned into a lump of flesh, the ones that Sid found all those years ago. Olivia was the only one who was compatible with something she calls the Diablos cells, which granted her immense power. She explains the church was planting demon cells into children, and the Archbishop admits to it, saying they needed power to fight the demon. Alpha also reveals that the story of Olivia severing the demon's arm is a load of BS, and in reality, she was told to extract new cells from the demon. Even with her powers, Olivia remained loyal because she thought her actions would save the world. The memory then shifts to a battlefield, and Alpha explains that Olivia's attempts to subdue the demon were pointless because it regenerated no matter how many times she took it down. Eventually, the cult members used some magic sealing chains to hold it in one place and extract demon cells from its body. In the end, the cult created those Walmart senzu beans that gave humans raw strength, but the side effects were too severe. The memory shifts to the lab where the arm of Diablos is stored, and Alpha explains the cult used the demon's blood to gain immortality. Much to everyone's surprise, the Archbishop was the leading researcher and was present at the time of the experiment. Despite giving what they promised, these beads had two major flaws. One was that they must be taken regularly for the effect to last, and the second was that there was only a very limited supply. They could only create 12 beads in 1 year, and Alpha ironically calls it a mere coincidence that the Knight of Rounds contains exactly 12 members. The Archbishop finally admits that he is, in fact, the 11th member of the cult. As he emits magic, Delta quickly stabs him in the back and casts his lifeless body aside. However, the Archbishop uses his immortality powers to separate the group into two different memories. Confronting Alpha's group, he uses Shadow Clone Jutsu to multiply and punish the intruders. Delta quickly takes out all her clones but notices that her powers are dwindling. The Baldy then explains that he lured them closer to the sanctuary because their magic will stop working once they are close enough. On the other hand, his own magic will grow stronger the closer he is to the place. Meanwhile, Aurora and Sid walk through a dark plane until they are thrown into the memory of a battlefield. They find Aurora's younger self again, and she tries to flatline her to break the illusion. However, the corpses start rising and turn the whole place into a Walking Dead episode. On the other hand, the rest of the Seven Shadows find a library that materializes thanks to their memories. In there, they find books that show them what their life would have been like if Shadow never rescued them. They use the newly invented cameras to take pictures of them. Just then, their dresses start melting, and Epsilon concludes that the closer they are to the sanctuary, the weaker their magic gets. Just then, Epsilon's dollar store honkers just hit the floor, but everyone pretends to see nothing because they don't want to see her toddler tear meltdown. On the battlefield, Aurora and Sid are playing Call of Duty Zombies, but after clearing the stage, Sid game ends the crying Aurora, which teleports them into a different room. Sid notices a sword at the end of a room, and Aurora tells him they have arrived at the center of the sanctuary. Meanwhile, even without most of her magic, Delta is slicing up the Baldy's clones like a psychopath. The guy is taken aback at first to see how freaky she is, but when he tries to make a comeback, she straight up deletes him from the picture. At the center of the sanctuary, Sid wonders how they can break the chains holding the final door. Aurora tells him they need a key, and the sword next to the door is what they are looking for. Sid tries to pull the sword out, but it locks in place because it can only be drawn by direct descendants of the heroes. Having no other options, they sit by the sword and wait for plot gods to send someone their way. Meanwhile, Delta continues to game end the clones. Eventually, she manages to break the memory, which allows Alpha to corner the Baldy. The guy finds Olivia's statue behind him. He calls for the hero to fight these intruders, and the one appears in the flesh to fight them. Just then, Epsilon arrives and tells Alpha that they have gathered enough information and are free to leave. Hearing this, the Shadow Garden retreats, but Alpha tells the Baldy that they will come back again and break through all of the sanctuary's defenses. And Baldy starts talking to himself about how he can use Alpha's blood to create more senza beans. Just then, he is alerted of intruders breaking into the sanctuary's main room. Meanwhile, Aurora and Sid are so bored they start playing tic-tac-toe on the floor. Sid asks what will happen once they destroy the core, and Aurora says she will be set free because this is just a prison of memories. Sid then waits for the main character to show up and pull the sword out, but when the Baldy arrives with Olivia, he realizes it is one of those instances where the bad guys arrive first to stop the MC. He takes one look at Olivia and realizes she looks almost exactly like Alpha, but does not think much of it. The Baldy then sends Olivia to take care of the intruders, and even Aurora is terrified because she is not strong enough for the hero. She tells Sid to skedaddle, but the guy doesn't listen and fights her. Despite getting smashed and sliced, Sid doesn't appear to be in any pain and asks Baldy why Olivia doesn't answer any of her questions. Aurora thinks Sid is one wrong move away from dying and begs him to just let it go, but he argues she will stay in prison forever if they don't pull out the sword. Aurora says he doesn't need to do anything more because he's already given her amazing new memories. She even agrees to cooperate with the cult in exchange for Sid's safety, but the guy keeps provoking him until he orders Olivia to uninstall his life subscription. Olivia stabs him with her sword, but the guy bites the flesh out of her neck and makes her goons so hard that her body shatters. With the elf baddie gone, Sid starts approaching the Baldy, but he starts begging for mercy. However, it was all a ruse to catch Sid off guard and summon a whole rave of different copies of Olivia. The guy takes one swing and shatters them all. The Baldy cannot believe he can use magic at the core of the sanctuary, and Sid vaguely tells him he's figured this out. The guy summons more Olivias to fight him, But Sid finally unleashes his full strength and goes nuclear on the place. Just like before, a huge explosion takes place which destroys the sanctuary, and Sid has a vision of the arm of Diablos getting freed from the chains. Later, he wakes up in Aurora's lap in the nearby forest, and Aurora reveals she will disappear soon because she's just a memory. She admits she was the one who lured him in because she had been lonely for so long, and even though she's getting Thanos snapped right now, she will remember this experience forever. She wants to tell him something in case he finds her real self, but before she can say the words, her body disappears. Meanwhile, Alexia, Rose, and Beta, who is still in disguise as Natsume, leave the sanctuary. Alexia and Rose both lament over how powerless they are against these big organizations and how they can't even tell who's right or wrong. They want to use their connections to learn the truth and even ask Natsume for help. After some initial hesitation, the two of them team up so they can get deeper and expose reality. Later, Alpha meets up with Epsilon, and they discuss how both the Sanctuary and the Holy Sword were vaporized after Sid's nuclear explosion. They also talk about a very important discovery they have made on this trip. Aurora also goes by the name of Demon Diablos. Elsewhere, Gamma meets up with a real estate agent in the city of Madlid who begs her to buy one of the prime buildings. Gamma is initially disinterested, but one of the Shadow Girls informs her that their plan will work, so she agrees to buy every single property around the Nile River. Meanwhile, Alpha sees all the shadows gathered in their base, which takes her back to the time Sid first bought it for them. Since she was the first one in line, she turned that base into a warm home and taught the others everything they know today. On the other hand, Alexia informs Iris of the church's involvement with the cult, but Iris's hands are tied until they find concrete evidence, mainly due to their stubborn father. They also need a lot of public support to make such a big accusation against the church, so Iris decides to take part in the Bushin Festival herself and make things right. Elsewhere, Rose is practicing her fencing when she suddenly feels a pain in her heart. As he looks closer, she realizes something cursed seems to be growing in her chest. A few days later, every background no-name character in the anime gathers for the Bushin Festival, and it fills Sid with excitement. He plans on going to the festival appearing weak and then surprising people by defeating opponents who look tougher than him. Later, he visits Gamma and tells her to put him in disguise so he can enter the festival looking weak. Gamma puts a magical gel on his face and uses a machine to change his face entirely, making him look like a budget Aizawa from My Hero. Sid also changes his posture and voice to seem more lifeless and is ready for the festival. Later, some locals spot a girl named Anaros in the streets who gained popularity after summoning an ancient goddess at the trials. Anaros runs into Sid on the way and tells him not to partake in the festival because he looks weak and pathetic. Sid walks away from her content because this means his disguise works perfectly. However, he runs into Anaros's OnlyFans sub on the way, who starts bullying him for ignoring his Discord kitten. Despite having a million ways to game end him, Sid just takes the beating because that only helps him sell the disguise. Eventually, Anaros steps in and tells the guy named Quentin to back off. After he leaves, she explains how she wants Sid to get a taste of what the real tournament would be like, so he quits beforehand. She genuinely cares for his safety and even offers to patch him up, only to get shocked when she sees all of his wounds have been healed. Realizing there is more than what meets the eye, she asks Sid to give her a name, and Sid decides to go by the alias of Mundane Man. Later, he meets up with Skell, who plans on studying the opponents and placing bets to make some quick buck. He talks about the favorites to win the festival, and both Rose and Iris appear on the list. On his way back, he realizes his plan would be spoiled if he gets paired with crowd favorites. Just then, he runs into Rose, who still thinks he's in love with her. She explains she has formed a group, or rather a psych ward, with Alexia and Natsume, and all three of them are focusing on making this world a better place. With a heavy sigh, she confesses that her dad wants her to marry a guy named Asshat, and she'd rather die a virgin than be known as Mrs. Asshat. In fact, the whole idea of becoming a housewife gives her the ick, because she wants to become an esteemed swordswoman. She seeks comfort in Sid's presence, but the guy offers her a zinger burger instead, which somehow makes her happy. Later, Skell watches the street brawls to analyze each contestant and place bets accordingly. Amid her calculations, he meets a guy in shining armor named Gildan, who introduces him to the concept of power levels. Observing the next fight between a muscular guy and Sid as Mundane Man, Gildan suspects the latter is gonna get wiped. He says this fight will be over in a second, and so it does, but the result is the exact opposite of what he predicted. Not a single person saw what happened in the ring, except for Anna Rose, who is growing increasingly sussy towards him. Gildan pretends that he knew the outcome and was merely acting to teach Skell a lesson. He also reveals Mundane Man will be facing him tomorrow and hints Skell to place all his money on him. The next day, Skell aggressively knocks on his door, and when Sid opens, he reveals Rose has stabbed her fiancé, Asshat Asshat, and has gone into hiding. Elsewhere, Beta, under the disguise of Natsume, tells Alexia that Rose's fiancé was the son of the Oriana Kingdom's duke, and this murder might spoil the relations between the two nations. She worries Rose will be given a harsh punishment if Oriana finds her first, so Alexia wants to hear her side of the story first. Natsume suggests they act rationally because Rose didn't want them to get involved, but Alexia says they are sworn allies, which means she can't abandon her. After she leaves, Beta tells one of her girls to feed her info so she stays out of harm. She also inquires about Rose's whereabouts and learns she was spotted in the sewers and was showing signs of immense pain in her chest. Meanwhile, the Bushin Festival continues, and Sid heads backstage, where he runs into a woman who can smell elf scent on his body. She shows her face and asks if he knows any elves, but Sid says he doesn't because even when he can clearly see she is related to Alpha. The girl can see through his lies and quickly attacks him, so Sid pretends to be weak to throw her off. He finally manages to fool her, so the woman introduces herself as Beatrix and leaves after apologizing. At the same time, Quentin meets Anna Rose in the stands, and the two agree that something about Mundane Man seems very sussy. They talk about the match he participated in yesterday, and even though Anna Rose could not see his movements, she was able to see Sid's right hand move right before his opponent fell. Just then, Gildan appears on the stage, and Anna Rose says he's an undefeated warrior who never participates in matches unless he is 100% sure about his win. Soon after, Mundane Man walks in as well, and their fight begins. Gildan immediately goes for the neck, but Sid dodges his attack so fast no one in the crowd sees what really happened. Quentin can't understand what happened, but Anna Rose says she saw Sid crack his neck just at the right time to dodge the attack, making them think it was a coincidence. As Sid stands there unfazed, Gildan feels disrespected and brings out his true strength, which amazes the audience. However, just like before, Sid does something and defeats him without the crowd seeing anything. Once again, Rose claims Sid sneezes just at the last second, which causes Gildan to crash into his sword, but Quentin thinks she's lost her mind and leaves the arena in frustration. Meanwhile, contrary to what the reports say, Asshat Asshat is alive and well, but Rose is still being charged for his murder. This naturally pisses off Eris, but she has to follow protocol because Asshat has brainwashed the Oriana King, who happens to be Rose's father. The next day, Mundane Man beats Quentin without attacking and advances to the next round. However, his next opponent is Anna Rose, so he's gonna have to pull a different trick to beat her. On his way back, he runs into Anna Rose, who gives him a warning, claiming he can't beat her like he beat the others. However, Sid drops his weights like Rock Lee against Guerra, and says he has been holding himself back, much to her shock. Meanwhile, Rose is being chased into the tunnels by guards, but manages to slip away without flatlining them. The next day, Sid struggles to imagine his dramatic power reveal for the Bushin Festival when Skell arrives at this door with a get-rich-quick scheme, which involves turning in Rose for her bounty. Initially uninterested, Sid sees his sister Claire visiting and decides to go with Skell to avoid her. As news of Rose's fugitive status spreads, Sid wonders why she stabbed her fiancé. While wandering the city, he hears a piano performance and recognizes the music. Recalling his past life, he remembers he was forced to learn piano but started appreciating it once he realized it was a free card to avoid talking to normies. On top of that, he realized that piano suited his style of shadow, and he felt cool knowing that he could give background music to his own battles. He investigates and learns that Epsilon is the pianist who has used the music Sid unknowingly taught her to become a famous composer. Later, she confirms playing the song called Moonlight Sonata because it is her favorite piece from Sid's lessons. Sid realizes she plagiarized his teachings but is pleased that she enjoys it. She also mentions she's won several awards and has been invited to Oriana to perform, but Sid remains unfazed. He asks her about Rose's location, and Epsilon shares that Rose is likely hiding in tunnels beneath the royal capital. Meanwhile, Beta meets Alexia to discuss suspicions that Asshat is working with the cult. Alexia also mentions that King Oriana seemed disturbed and lost, but suspects it might be because he is in shock. As they head into the tunnels, suspecting Rose may have escaped through them, Alexia is determined to gather evidence while Beta pretends to worry about getting lost. Deep in the tunnels, Rose suffers from signs of possession and reflects on her encounter with her father in Ashat. Realizing the king and his entire council were under mind control, she attacked Ashat but was framed as a traitor. Ashat demanded her surrender before the Bushin Festival, or he would force her father to kill a guest. Desperate and conflicted, she wandered off into the tunnels and started thinking if surrendering would have prevented war. As her condition worsens, she dreams of a peaceful life where Sid opens her chamber of secrets, but sees it as an impossible fantasy. Suddenly, she hears Moonlight Sonata echoing through the tunnels and follows the sound to its source. Eventually, she finds Shadow playing the piano in an abandoned hall. After applauding his performance, she confesses her helplessness and failure to protect her loved ones. Shadow offers her power, stating true strength lies not in one's abilities, but in one's resolve. Rose accepts the offer, and his magic frees her from possession. Soon after, the cult assassins arrive, but Rose, now with her own boss music, effortlessly defeats them while admiring Shadow's power as a guiding light. Sensing the battle, Alexia and Beta rush toward the scene and find Rose. Rose declares she has gained strength and will follow her chosen path. Alexia asks her to spill the beans, but she refuses to explain further to protect her. Enraged, Alexia challenges her, but Rose easily overpowers her and knocks her out. Beta, being a member of the Shadow Garden, understands Rose's resolve and wishes her success, believing they may reunite in the future. After Rose leaves, she also questions whether Shadow's decision to grant Rose power was intentional or not. Back at the concert hall, authorities investigate the mysterious disappearance of the piano. At sunset, Sid returns to his dorm with a big smile, admiring his performance as Shadow and enjoying the stolen piano as a trophy. However, Claire greets him with a fake smile, and the guy prepares himself for a beatdown. Later, Claire chokes Sid in his room, and the guy gets excited probably because he watches too much family therapy. Claire complains about him repeatedly breaking promises, particularly skipping their summer vacation. The woman keeps choking him to see how long he can last without air, but Sid tells her choking actually stops blood flow instead of air. She hands him a VIP ticket to the Bushin Festival and demands he watch her as she represents their school. Meanwhile, Alexia revisits Natsume's former residence but finds she has moved abroad to do some research. Left behind is a dossier detailing relationships between the Oriana Kingdom, the church, and business enterprises. Annoyed, Alexia refuses to accept pity, gripping her sword as fireworks signal the next day of the Bushin Festival. At the stadium, Sid arrives at his VIP seating and is surprised to find himself next to Iris, who recognizes him as Claire's brother. She explains her intention to recruit Claire into her Night Order post-graduation and apologizes for the Xenon incident, making Sid uneasy about breaking his background character role. As the matches take place, Iris notes Anaros as impressive but still determined to win herself. Sid suggests another fighter, Mundane Man, is a strong contender, but the Diddy gang dismisses him as merely fast and lucky. This causes a tornado in Sid's pants, as it means his plan to cultivate Mundane's reputation is succeeding. Iris also mentions a mysterious elf, the first Bushin Festival champion, who is later revealed to be Beatrix. Sid recognizes her but is unaware of her fame. As Sid leaves the stadium, he senses a strong presence but maintains his background character act. Beatrix appears, carrying a bag of burgers, and playfully accuses him of ignoring her. She asks if he has seen an elf resembling her, and he lies again to keep his identity hidden. They briefly bond over exchanging burgers before parting ways. In the VIP seating, Ashat takes Sid's seat beside Iris, and she immediately goes into a foul mood because his breath smells like rotten garlic. He plays off their interaction as friendly, calling his issue with Rose a lover's quarrel and claiming Rose will return soon. He mentions that his king will attend the festival tomorrow, while Iris states her father, King Klaus, will also be present. Just then, Ashat notes Anaros entering the arena and expresses interest in recruiting her. Before the fight, he asks Iris about Anaros' opponent, Mundane Man. While she initially doubts him, she notices his unsettling confidence. As the match starts, Anaros tries to overwhelm Mundane with speed, but he is a Sekiro veteran who parries effortlessly. When she sees an opening and slashes, Sid uses instant transmission, which leaves only an afterimage. With overwhelming speed, Mundane dominates Anaros, striking her down while barely using his full power. Watching in the stands, both Iron and Ashat are impressed and wonder where Mundane Man learned all of this. Ashat then notes that Eris will face Mundane next and questions if she's got what it takes. Eris acknowledges his opponent's swordplay's beauty overpowers hers, but insists that pretty privileges don't get you anywhere in fights, which means he's been hiding his true strength. Ashat orders an investigation into Mundane, concerned about his possible ties to the lawless city. Later, Anaros finds Mundane and acknowledges her complete defeat. She thanks him for making her touch grass and invites him to serve in Velgaltha's government, but he declines, saying such a path is too bright for him. She promises to continue her journey and hopes to meet him again. The Bushin Festival continues with Eris obliterating her opponent, leaving a crater and disintegrating her sword from the sheer magic overflow. Just then, she notices Beatrix and follows her outside, where Beatrix offers her a burger for comfort which Eris declines. At sunset, Cid feels satisfied with his stylish swordplay, having achieved 70% of his plan. Considering his next move, he debates between winning outright, disappearing after defeating Eris, or taking a villainous route as a shadowy assassin. Returning home, he finds Claire, who asks if he had fun watching her fight. Meanwhile, Rose, hiding in the Midgar Academy's ruins, dons a clean uniform and clings to a burger wrapper from Cid for motivation. Staring into a broken mirror, she steels herself for her next move. While practicing, Eris recalls her accolades, including winning the Bushin Festival, and yet doubts plague her mainly because her father refuses to let her investigate the divine teachings. Swearing to prove herself, she practices even harder, but she is still not 100% confident. During the Bushin Festival finals, Cid enjoys VIP treatment with Eris, who is free from official duties because she has a match today. Their moan is interrupted when Beatrix, the goddess of war, arrives and asks the crowd if they've seen her niece. Cid is happy to play his background character role in this scenario, but gains all the attention when Beatrix says Cid is stronger than he looks. Meanwhile, Ashat drugs King Oriana and masks the scent to avoid suspicion. Confident Rose will try to save her father. He plans to use the king to assassinate Midgar's ruler and spark a war. However, he worries about Mundane Man's unknown origins and stations Klut's third children to monitor the arena. Arriving at the VIP section, Beatrix offends him by stating that he has stinky feet, but Eris intervenes and reveals she is her guest. Realizing Beatrix's immense strength and heightened senses, Ashat reconsiders his plans and hopes Rose's appearance will keep everything on track. As Eris prepares to fight Mundane Man, she feels the support of her kingdom but doubts herself because she cannot sense his strength. When the match begins, she sees an attack coming for her neck and instinctively retreats, only to find herself unharmed. She then realizes Cid's skill allows him to manipulate her perception, so she charges at full power, but Mundane proves he never even drew his sword. With a swift move, he pins her down, which leaves everyone in the crowd in shock. As Eris admits defeat, Ashat is watching from the stands and cannot believe she lost without making a single move. As Eris's father departs, Rose appears in the VIP section just as Ashat predicted. He introduces her to a drugged King Oriana, and Rose apologizes to her father for what she is about to do. Despite being in Ashat's control, Oriana forgives her daughter, allowing him to rush in and take his life. Following that, Rose puts a sword at her own throat and reveals this was her final act as the Princess of Oriana. But before she can delete her save file, Mundane Man intervenes and takes out Ashat's guards. He then transforms into Shadow, but Rose remembers him as Bandit Slayer who once saved her from a group of thieves. Ever since that day, Rose has been secretly simping for him, but now that she knows his idol is also the guy who gave her power, she decides to live and continue fighting. After acknowledgement from Shadow, Rose flees the scene, and Ashat asks the surrounding folks to help him. Beatrix seizes the opportunity to fight Shadow, and their clash is so intense it shatters the VIP section, forcing Ashat to flee while their battle continues outside. Meanwhile, King Klaus Midgar is informed that Shadow's fight may leave the stadium and that Ashat is fleeing toward Oriana Kingdom. King Klaus orders the return of King Oriana's body, despite knowing it could spark civil unrest. Meanwhile, Eris is enraged by Shadow's appearance and retrieves an ancient sword from the wrecked VIP seating. On the stadium rooftop, Shadow tests Beatrix's skills by effortlessly shifting his presence and evading her attacks. Eris joins the fight, wielding her newly acquired fire-infused blade. Though Shadow finds it amusing rather than threatening, he engages both opponents and easily counters their attacks. Meanwhile, Rose escapes to an alley and contemplates whether to return home and support the anti-Chancellor faction. Just then, Alpha appears and offers her a choice to join Shadow Garden. When Rose asks if they intend to save the Oriana Kingdom, Alpha states that they will not intervene unless Rose proves herself. Having no other choice, Rose accepts and is granted a slime bodysuit to escape. The battle between Shadow, Iris, and Beatrix escalates across the city, reaching a construction site where Shadow uses crowbars to block their attacks. They continue fighting atop a moving train, with Shadow taunting them while twirling the crowbars. Iris demands to know his true identity, but he responds mockingly in his mundane man voice. On a clock tower, Beatrix adapts to Shadow's techniques, allowing her to counter his surprise attacks. He praises her skill, but suggests she learn proper magic. Meanwhile, Iris attacks wildly but is easily overpowered. She proposes a coordinated attack with Beatrix, but Shadow effortlessly counters, suplexing Beatrix into Iris before stomping both into the ground. When they struggle to rise, Iris declares that the entire kingdom has mobilized against Shadow, insisting he has nowhere to run. In response, Shadow laughs maniacally before expanding his magic to envelop the royal capital, leaving Iris and Beatrix in shock. Floating above them, he plans on hitting the whole capital with a Shinra Tensei. However, rather than unleashing destruction, he flashbangs the entire city and leaves them with a clear day. Accepting her loss, Beatrix sheathes her sword, while Iris collapses in frustration. Elsewhere, Sherry, who is now obsessed with revenge, reads a newspaper that paints Shadow as a villain who was repelled by Iris and Beatrix. Her room is filled with his wanted posters and swears to avenge her father. Meanwhile, in Oriana Kingdom, Ashat desperately seeks forgiveness from Mordred, his superior in the cult. Ashat apologizes and insists that Rose will return because the nation of Oriana does not have a king. At the train station, Beatrix prepares to leave and advises Iris not to dwell on her defeat, as many forces in the world are beyond mortal power. Meanwhile, the Knights continue their hunt for Shadow as Gamma utilizes Mitsugoshi to rebuild the capital. Shadow Garden members, including Nu and Beta, deduce that Shadow is using the chaos in Midgar to distract from events in the Oriana Kingdom. Ita has also developed a communication system for Shadow Garden's personnel in Oriana. At Mitsugoshi, Rose and Alpha gather supplies before traveling into the mountains. Rose is surprised to learn that Shadow once fought and defeated the Mist Dragon, earning the title of ruler over the region. Alpha then introduces Rose to Shadow Garden's secret headquarters, the ancient city of Alexandria, where she is assigned to Lambda for training. To symbolize her transformation, Lambda orders Rose's clothing destroyed, including the cherished burger wrapper from Sid, causing her to wail in despair. Back in the underground ruins, Shadow plays Moonlight Sonata, once more as feathers drift around him. He reflects on how everything has gone according to plan, but the hour of awakening approaches. After finishing his performance, he leaves as a single black feather settles on the piano keys. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to see more recaps like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.